Now, I think I covered everybody. Anybody else want to come up and talk? Yeah. So, as mentioned, my mom, very honored that she's here and also honored that she's my mother. We spoke, and she came up with got all of this off the ground for the 200th year anniversary. And as mentioned, tomorrow is the date, so we thought, what a wonderful time to have this. So, bringing my mother up, I came up the ramp here in her little go-kart that she has. And I said, okay, I'm going to bring you back down, bring you there, and then bring you back up when you're ready. She goes, no, I think I'm going to stay here the whole time. It was a rocky road going up here. So without further ado, I'm looking very forward to this, and I know all of you are too. Shirley Porter.
Hello. I don't have much to say after all. A lot's been said in my talk, but that's good. Let me say in the beginning, when we came in 1973 to meet with the Pastor Parish Relations Committee, Madeline Hokanson was a member, and she said, now Shirley, you don't have to be nervous. We're your friends, not knowing that I have essential tremor and had it more than half my life. And we did have a support group in this church when I lived in Mayapack. So, I have another question. Am I in the town of Bedford or Newcastle? There was a story, if you don't understand what the preacher's sermon, that it's because he's in the town of Newcastle and the congregation's in the town of Bedford. But I did find out recently that the town line goes through the front yard of the church, so that kills the story. When you get older, like I am, a lot of the pieces of the puzzle begin coming together. It's like you're looking down and seeing things in a different way. Well, we begin in England. We're talking about the founders of Methodism. I had this all planned, but I'd like to do a little begot, whatever. The parents of John and Charles Wesley, what was their background that he was born into? And Samuel Wesley was a rector of the church near England, in Epworth, Lincolnshire County. Now that's where Abraham Lincoln came from, his ancestors. And Susanna, his wife, was an interesting person. Together they had 19 children, Now I want to say for you that are mothers, it was a different time. There were people in the family who looked after some of the children. There were housemaids, nannies, whatever. So Susanna was free at times to do things that she hadn't, that ordinarily a preacher's wife wouldn't do. She met with the men instead of gossiping with the women in the parlor, and they respected her, listened to what she had to say. But as time went by, Samuel realized his wife wasn't saying amen when he mentioned King Charles, who was on the throne. And this happened over and over. So finally, he realized that she was of a different political view than he was. And he just couldn't stand to live in the same house with her. So he went off for almost a year. And when he came back, John Wesley was a product of their reunion. When John was 6 years old, there was a fire in the rectory at Epworth. And a fire in those days was even worse than today because the houses had thatched roofs. And try as he might, he couldn't get out of his room. And so he went to the window, and they saw him. The neighbors saw him, and they formed a human ladder of two people to reach him. Later in life, he referred to that as he was a brand, just a minute, a brand plucked from the burning. And even as a grown man, he respected Thursday nights, which were the times he had with his mother. She took time for every child. She took them aside. I won't tell you everything she did, but she, even by the time a baby was a year old, it learned to cry softly. Brother Charles Wesley was born in 1707, the 18th child. He was a preemie and sickly at times through his life. And they wrapped him in wool to keep him warm until his actual due date. At times he had a little problem with John. You know, big brothers can be a little bossy. But one time John was discussing his lack of religion, and Charles said, "Do you want me to be a saint overnight?" John entered Oxfield around 1720. And later, of course, Charles did the same. Now, I forgot to mention that though Charles was sickly, he lived to be 80, and he wrote the words to 7,000 hymns. Some were good, some were bad. But it was about everything imaginable in life, from the Old Testament through the New Testament. After John and Charles graduated, see if I can get this right, General James Oglethorpe invited them to come to Georgia in America because he had a colony at St. Simon's Island, and he would like Charles to be his secretary, also of Indian Affairs, and John to be a missionary to the Indians. John fell in love, had a bad experience. She married somebody else. Later, Charles had a wonderful marriage. And he was sickly at the time, and that's where he met Sarah Gwynn in South Wales. They had, I've forgotten how many children they had, but everybody had a lot. It took a lot of work, and especially if you were farming. So after 6 months or so, they returned to London, and John felt that he had been a failure. But then they realized there was a lot of work to do at home in the British Isles. While John was helping his father in a different parish, Charles formed the Holy Club, which out of that came the word Methodist, the way they did things. And it was disciplined way of living. And John, I want to skip ahead. John was a great health person. He disciplined himself in eating habits and exercise. He wanted his pastors to walk. And then he managed to invent an electric medical device that helped people with depression and other problems. But people began to wonder, well, they were outgrowing these little holy clubs and so on, and they needed a building where they could worship. And so there was a foundry, it was called Foundry in London, and it was a cannon factory in the beginning, and it had exploded along the way. So there was a lot of repairing to be done. And subscriptions were taken, and then John himself, out of his purse, it said, donated what he had. If you were ever in need, he would give you something. He lived a very, no flashy life for him. Once Charles was, when they were refused to preach in the Anglican churches because of their music, and they're going out into the field, the mine, and wherever people were. They sometimes had to preach in the churchyard. And Sarah, Charles' wife, would go with him at times, riding on the back of his horse. She was a soloist, and Charles was refused in the church, she wouldn't sing there either. Once at least Charles was mobbed, and it was by the preachers, the Anglican preachers in the mob, pelted with eggs, stones, and rocks through the window where he was staying. Now, we're going to America. Methodism. Whoops, I got the... Before, well, let's see. John Wesley sent some volunteers, 2 volunteers, to America to be missionaries or to help. And one of them was Francis Asbury, and another, Dr. Thomas Coke. And there's a story, a funny little thing, I don't have it with me, fortunately, of a poem that Charles wrote about who consecrates who as a bishop. That was the general idea. And in Bishop Asbury's journals and letters, there's a passage about 1771 that he had preached at North Castle, at the home of James Hall and Elizabeth, his wife. And I don't have that with me, but he mentions how many people were there, and the halls had a special room. Is anything being projected?
Picture of Francis Asbury.
How about the Hall's house? It's a beautiful house, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he even preached in Bedford for a week, and I have an idea that it was at the courthouse. You know, schools, courthouses, wherever there was a need. There was no separation of church and state in those days. So there's a good description of Elizabeth. She was happy and in love with her religion. She clapped her hands, she stomped her foot, and she was good in the hayfield, as good as the men were. I have to skip over what's already been said. That time of the Great Revival was because after the Revolutionary War, bad things happened, and the revival was due for sure. And because James and Elizabeth's house was too small for the meetings, they went to the house of their son, Jonathan Hall, which was bigger. Caleb and Mary Kirby came from around Oyster Bay area, Long Island maybe, and to the Main. That's what they called it when it came to the mainland. And they donated a quarter of an acre of land for church to be built. And if you've ever been in the bagel shop, I don't know the name of it, but that was the site of the first church in 1826. And then that was too small, so they built again. I've forgotten the date, 1849 maybe, anyway. It was, I forgot to mention the Harlem division of the New York Central came in 1847, and Mount Kisco Depot came about. I have a word processor, and I only use it as a typewriter, and I can't see what I'm typing, and I can't read what I'm writing, so it's not a very good. I see I shortened it, typing over a couple of lines. The second, 1843, was the second house of worship. And it was different. As I sat here, I thought, maybe this is a little bit like the church was. I could see people coming in, and that's how the church was faced. So if you came in late, you were seen. And there was something called splendid isolation, which isn't happening here. It was the women and the children on one side and the men on the other. Well, one Sunday morning, Dr. Slauson, being Episcopalian, came in and sat on the wrong side. And immediately the women and children went to sit with their fathers and husbands. That was the end of that. The land here, I don't have the date. I forgot to capitalize it. But a piece of the St. Mark's Cemetery was purchased, and it was called Hall Cemetery. That's mostly Methodists buried there, but scattered throughout St. Mark's are other Methodists and children, young children. A piece of land was purchased from Hezekiah Raymond to build this building, 1866. And because of that being 1866, the anniversary of Methodism, it could have been called Centenary Church, but it never was. And as soon as, I'm not mentioning money because it's a different world now, and things sounded cheap, you know. In Moses Fish's carefully written a trustee account, it mentions $150 given to Gamaliel King, although he didn't know how to spell the first name. And that, it didn't happen. Where's the model? There is a model of the church. And I've been from Riverhead to AV School of Architecture in Columbia University in Brooklyn, where his studio was. And I'm quite sure that was the model of the church, which either came on the stage or on the Harlem Railroad, which makes sense. It's metal, and it's like the material that Gamaliel King and his partner Ketchum made the facades of the buildings in the city. During the centennial of the village, we had a parade. We were dressed up, and we had open house at the parsonage, and there were about 125 that came. It was fun. The parsonage was built by George Marshall, who was, I think, from Bedford Hills, maybe. Now, we come to the music. In 1892, Jardine organ was purchased. And I'm just doing the history of the organ. 1954, an Allen organ. 1985, Allen digital organ. And now we have whatever, the piano and keyboard. I'm not up to that, knowing how to describe it. In 1884, something sad happened for the Newcastle church. 55 members left in order to found Bedford's